Turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 4. If you're reading one of the Bibles in your pew, it's page 216. We're going to be looking for holiness in this particular passage. 1 Samuel chapter 4, starting on page 216. And as you're turning there, I think it would be helpful for us to review what we've learned so far in this sermon series. We started at chapter 1, verse 1 of 1 Samuel. And I said we are in the period of Israel's history where there were judges. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, all the way through chapter 3, basically we met Samuel focused on what happened in his home, in his family, and his early years serving at the tabernacle under the leadership of one of those judges, a priest by the name of Eli. We learned that the Lord was with Samuel. And at the very conclusion of our last sermon last week, we learned that all Israel was starting to recognize that Samuel was a prophet. Now, like I said, the focus has primarily been on Samuel, his family, the tabernacle. And what we learned at the tabernacle is that there were two wicked priests. They were actually Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas. They do not respect the Lord. And so we had a great contrast between Samuel, who's growing in the Lord, who's becoming a prophet, and these two priests who are wicked and don't respect the Lord. Well, now the writer, instead of focusing very clearly on Samuel's family and the tabernacle, he opens wide his focus to the whole nation of Israel. And these first few verses in chapter 4 are critical to understanding the story as it unfolds all the way through chapters 5, 6, and 7. So it's important that we understand this. So let's begin reading midway through 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 1. It says, "Now the Israelites went out to fight against the Philistines. The Israelites camped at Ebenezer and the Philistines at Aphek. The Philistines deployed their forces to meet Israel, and as the battle spread, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 of them on the battlefield. When the soldiers returned to camp, the elders of Israel asked, 'Why did the Lord bring defeat on us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the Lord's covenant from Shiloh, so that he may go with us and save us from the hand of our enemies.'" Now, at first glance, that description of this battle really seems straightforward. Israel lost a battle, and Israel has a solution to win the next one. But there is so much more in those few verses, and we really need to understand this. If we're going to understand what happens next, those verses that I just read hold the clue. Now, there's an interesting question there in verse 3. Take a look at verse 3. Do you see the question? I think it really ought to sound familiar. It's a question that we ourselves ask so often. So after the battle in which Israel suffered a loss of 4,000 soldiers, the elders asked the question, "Why did the Lord bring defeat?" Does that sound like a familiar question? It should, because you and I often ask that in a very similar way. Why, Lord, when we are facing something difficult? Maybe we hear about a sickness in our family, a death. Maybe we face a broken relationship, an accident, a job loss. Why, Lord? We are very quick to turn to question the Lord as if he did this to us. As if we have no influence on our lives. As if the world is not a broken, fallen world and where things go wrong all the time. Can you imagine if we were to turn to the Lord and ask the Lord, "Why, Lord, did you do this?" Every single time we hear, not only about stuff in our lives, but in all the world around us, every single time something goes wrong. There is so much that goes wrong in the world. So we don't ask, "Why, Lord?" Every time something goes wrong. Typically, we only turn to God and start questioning God when it affects us personally. How many of you had a spiritual crisis a few weeks ago when that container ship slammed into the Key Bridge in Baltimore and crashed it into the water and asked, "Why, Lord?" A bunch of people lost their lives in that. Now, my guess is that you were likely all saddened by it, maybe even appalled, because it is a serious disaster, but it's like the many, many other disasters that happen in our world all the time. And if they don't affect us personally, we lose interest really fast. But when our body is being affected, when our loved one is lost, it is very natural for us to turn to God and say, "Why, Lord?" Now, it is a good thing to turn to the Lord. He can handle it. In fact, He invites us to bring our whole selves to Him. Cast your cares on the Lord because He cares for you. He wants us to bring our good things to Him, our struggles, our despair, all of us to Him. I mean, the Psalms of Lament are examples of that. People hurting, they are crying out to God, they are complaining to Him. But notice something here in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 3, the people don't do any of that. There is no lament. There's no indication that they even go to God. No prayer, no inquiry. Nothing of what would have been typical in their day, which would have been, let's go to the prophet and ask him to inquire of the Lord for us. There is none of that. Instead, it seems that they quickly blame God for defeat, and then they take matters into their own hands. I think we need to notice the difference here between going to God and blaming God. Going to God is a posture where we're looking for help. We're looking for answers. We're inviting God to speak into our situation. It's a very humble heart posture. Blame, something totally different. Blame is when we've got it all figured out and we are casting the blame on someone else for what they did. But then I wonder, could it be said that they are actually trying to involve God in the process in a humble way? Could it be said that what they decide to do is actually being faithful to God? So let me explain, because remember what they do? First, they question, why did the Lord bring this defeat on us? And then they have an idea. Let's go to the tabernacle and let's get the Ark of the Covenant. Maybe they think that by getting this special artifact, this religious object, they're actually faithfully bringing God into the battle with them. They even say that by doing this, if you look there, that God will go with us and save us from the hand of our enemies. Are they being faithful? We have to ask, though, notice how they describe this. God will. How can they be so sure? Is this a guaranteed victory? Do they really know what they're talking about? Now, to answer these questions, I think we need to hear a little bit more about the Ark of the Covenant. What in the world is the Ark of the Covenant? Are we talking about Noah's Ark here? Is this like a big giant boat that they want to bring into battle? Is this a battleship? A naval vessel? No. To learn about the Ark of the Covenant, we need to go to Exodus chapter 25. That's the chapter where God gave instructions for building this particular ark. It's actually a small chest, not much bigger than this, right in front of me. It's made of wood. It's overlaid with gold. And inside the chest, God asked the Israelites to store 3 very significant items that were symbolic of God's work in their nation's history. First of all, the tablets, the 2 stone tablets on which He wrote the 10 Commandments. They were in there. Secondly, some manna, which they collected. Manna was that miraculous food that God provided them while they were wandering for 40 years in the desert. Thirdly, Aaron's staff. Aaron was Moses' brother. He was the priest, and he had a staff. And on the staff budded flowers, almond flowers. Those 3 things were in the chest. So what is this chest? Is it just kind of like a special items chest that they're going to put in their museum? There's no treasure in there. No money. What about like powerful talismans? I mean, what about Aaron's staff? Do they pull the staff out and can they shoot blast rays and defeat the enemy like you see in Harry Potter? It's nothing like that. That's never how they use the items in the Ark of the Covenant. God never says anything like that. But there is more. In Exodus chapter 25, we learn something special about the cover that is over top of the Ark of the Covenant. And this is what we read. Make an atonement cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide, and make 2 cherubim, angels, out of hammered gold at the ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub on one end and the second cherub on the other. Make the cherubim of one piece with the cover at the 2 ends. The cherubim are to have their wings spread upward, overshadowing the cover with them. The cherubim are to face each other, looking toward the cover. Place the cover on top of the ark and put in the ark the tablets of covenant law that I will give you. There, above the cover between the 2 cherubim that are over the ark of the covenant law, I will meet with you and give you all my commands for the Israelites. So that's this ark, this chest, this special artifact. And the elders, they do seem to have a vaguely correct idea that God told his people that he would meet them there at the ark. There's a very real sense in which that ark cover is God's throne. And there were also some really interesting events in the history of the nation of Israel in which the Ark of the Covenant displays the power of God. In Numbers chapter 10, the ark seems to move by the power of God on its own. In Joshua chapter 3, the priests transport the ark into the Jordan River, and the waters of the Jordan River part, and they're able to cross on dry ground. In Joshua chapter 6, the priests then transport the ark around the city of Jericho, and eventually the walls come tumbling down. So when we return to 1 Samuel chapter 4, there is this sense that the elders know something, but they make a false assumption. They think that all they need to do is bring out the ark and it is guaranteed victory. As if God has no choice in the matter. As if God is forced to do their bidding. That false assumption is something that we call folk theology. It's not good theology, it's folk theology. It is of the folks. Let me explain. Years ago, someone told me how they got into a car accident while they were driving on a snowy road. They hit a slick patch, spun out, and they came to a rest along a snowbank on the side of the road. No injury, no damage to their car, no collision with other vehicles, nothing. You know what they said? They were protected because on the dashboard of their car, they had a little plastic angel figurine. Did the presence of the angel, that little plastic figurine, did that force God to protect them? No. That person actually had no idea if God was involved in their situation at all. They were speculating. They were taking bits and pieces of biblical teaching and they were mixing it together with something in their own thoughts. They were creating something new that is not supported by biblical teaching. That's folk theology. Folk theology is essentially made-up beliefs that is crafted from some semblance of biblical teaching, mixed with personal ideas and maybe an idea out there in our culture. That's what the elders of Israel were doing. They had an improper belief based on some biblical teaching that they mixed with their own ideas in the history of the past, that all they needed to do was to get the priests to bring the Ark of the Covenant out to the battlefield, and God was duty-bound to bring them victory. So, as we summarize those few verses that I read, the Israelites lost a battle, and their response is not to ask God for help, but instead, they trust their own ability to analyze the situation. And their solution is folk theology. Their solution in the end is they told God what he did, and then they told him what he was going to do. Now, initially, this act of folk theology has a profound effect on the Philistines. So let's read, continuing in verse 4. So the people sent men to Shiloh, and they brought back the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim. And Eli's two sons, these are the wicked priests, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the Ark of the Covenant of God. When the Ark of the Lord's covenant came into the camp, all Israel raised such a great shout that the ground shook. So this is a big moment. There are the priests, Hophni and Phinehas, leading the ark out onto the battlefield. And the Israelite soldiers are cheering loudly. Everyone is assuming a victory is guaranteed. Hophni and Phinehas are probably reveling in being the center of attention. Huge smiles on their faces, arrogantly walking the ark right out into battle. You see what's happening here? The elders of the people of Israel have made a grave mistake based on a false assumption. Their assumption was that it is automatic, it is guaranteed that where the ark goes, God goes. And he is required to do whatever they want him to do. The Israelites, in essence, believe that they are pulling out an unstoppable weapon. But it's like a cannon that has no ammunition and no firepower. They think they can taste victory at this moment when they're about to be routed. It's the height of arrogance. So let's keep reading. Hearing the uproar, the Philistines asked, "What's all this shouting in the Hebrew camp?" When they learned that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, the Philistines were afraid. "A god has come into the camp," they said. "Oh no, nothing like this has ever happened before. We're doomed. Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? They are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. Be strong, Philistines. Be men, or you will be subject to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be men and fight." So the Philistines fought, and the Israelites were defeated. And every man fled to his tent. The slaughter was very great. Israel lost 30,000 foot soldiers. The ark of God was captured, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, died. It's absolute disaster. The Philistines had heard those stories from Israel's past, about God's victory, about the Ark of the Covenant of God, and how God freed them from slavery and brought them through the wilderness into the Promised Land. And the Philistines are just believing like most people would in the ancient Near East. This is very cultural about how they understood the situation. They believe that behind the scenes there are spiritual beings, there are gods who are at work. So if they can just manipulate the gods in the right way, they're going to have victory. And with that in mind, they survey the situation and they're like, this is not good. They believe the Israelites have just pulled out this God weapon, this ark. They believe that Israel's God weapon is more powerful than their gods. They're right about that. But it's so interesting that their fear of the God weapon, of the ark, it leads them to think even more fearfully. They don't want to become subject. They don't want to become slaves to Israel. But the Philistines don't know that God is not with the ark. The Philistines don't know that God is not required to do what Israel wants him to do. The Philistines don't know that God cannot be manipulated. This is not a genie in a bottle situation. The Philistines' fears of becoming subject to the Israelites, it actually inspires the Philistines to be extra vigorous in battle. And though they think that they are about to face this massive, powerful God weapon, God's not there. And the Philistines decimate the Israelites. Hophni and Phinehas, the priests, are killed. They should have never allowed the ark to be removed from the tabernacle. But in their arrogance, they took it out there, thinking that this was going to be a wonderful display of power. They're killed. The ark is lost. Israel is defeated in a massive way. Think about the lie that Hophni and Phinehas have been perpetrating on the people. God is a holy God. Obviously, God is deeply saddened by the disaster that has happened to Israel. And it's all because he has these wicked leaders who have led Israel so falsely. Remember what we read in previous weeks, particularly back in chapter 2. Hophni and Phinehas, they were ripping people off. They were sleeping with women who served at the tabernacle. And their father, Eli the priest, did not take action to stop them. When he finally did confront them, which only occurred after Eli himself was confronted by an unnamed prophet, Eli's sons refused to listen to their father. And we learned that the news of evil in the tabernacle spread far and wide in the nation of Israel. And now these priests commit the sin of trying to arrogantly use the Ark of the Covenant. They wanted to essentially use God. They did not consult him. They didn't hear his wishes. They didn't inquire of God's wisdom. They had no respect for the holiness of God. God has already shown that he is deeply concerned about the sin that was in the tabernacle perpetrated through these priests. He's not going to overlook a sin and allow the elders and the priests to just use him as a super weapon in battle. God is far more concerned about the heart of the people. He's concerned for holiness because he knows that is the situation in which it is best for all the people. He wants them to repent. Now, in the rest of chapter 4, we get an extended account of Eli finally hearing the news about his sons who passed away in battle. In shock, we learn that he falls off his chair, he breaks his neck, and dies. Then at the very end of the chapter, we learn that Phinehas' wife, she also heard the news. She was pregnant, and the shock of her husband being killed in battle is so emotional, it causes her to go into labor, and in the process of delivering the baby, she dies. But not before she names him, her son, Ichabod. Ichabod means no glory, because God's glory had departed from Israel. This is a powerful image of how the people, in their lack of pursuing the holiness of God, had allowed the ark of God to be captured. And that brings us to chapter 5. Chapter 5 takes place in the Philistine city of Ashdod. The Philistines transport the Ark of the Covenant and place it in their temple to their god Dagon. And there, some really strange things begin to occur. The next morning, we read that the Philistines find the statue of Dagon has fallen down, face down, before the Ark of the Covenant, as if it's worshiping God. Well, they are distressed. They put the statue back up in place, and overnight, it happens again. But this time, the idol's face and hands break off. And so the Philistines move the ark to the town of Gath. The same thing happens there. God also then begins to afflict the people with tumors. It happens in Gath, it happens in Ekron, and the people of Philistia begin to panic and cry out. In chapter 6, we read that the Philistines have had possession of the ark for 7 months, and they can't take it anymore. God is at work through his presence, afflicting the people of Philistia. And so what do? They send the ark back with a gift of gold to restore it back to the people of Israel. The Philistines show that they are very aware of Israel's God's reputation when he freed their people from slavery in Egypt. So look at 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 6. Here's what the Philistines say. Why do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh did when Israel's God dealt harshly with them? Did they not send the Israelites out so they could go on their way? You see, the Philistines recognize the holiness of God, and they don't want any part of it because they know what God did to Egypt. He sent 10 plagues on Egypt, and they see God now as sending plagues on them. They do not want to fall prey to the same hardness of heart that the Egyptian Pharaoh had. It was arrogance. And so they place the ark on a cart, pulled by calves, and they send it on its way, following it to make sure it gets back to Israel. And it does, to the town of Beth Shemesh. There, the people of Israel see the Ark of the Covenant on this cart and they rejoice. They even sacrifice to the Lord. And that begins their expression of repentance to God. But some of the people of the town, Beth Shemesh, they get a little curious. They want to look inside the ark, see the 10 Commandments, the manna, the staff of Aaron that they've heard about from their history. They disrespect the holiness of God, and they die in the process because God told them from the Mosaic law never to do such a thing. And so notice in 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 20, the people of Beth Shemesh asked, "Who can stand in the presence of the Lord, this holy God? To whom will the ark go up from here?" They recognize the holiness of God and how important it is. Now, hold that thought because I want us to now get to the conclusion of the story in chapter 7. And we'll return to thinking about the holiness of the Lord in just a minute. So, the people of Beth Shemesh have just asked this question. Where will the ark go? Well, we learn in chapter 7 where the ark goes. In verses 1 and 2, we get a little bit of a surprise. The ark does not go back to the tabernacle. Instead, the ark goes to the town of Kiriath Jearim, to the house of a man named Abinadab, and it will stay there for 20 years. So what have we seen? We've seen the Philistines encounter the holiness of God. The people of Beth Shemesh have experienced the holiness of God in a somewhat painful way. The wicked priests have experienced the holiness of God as they've been killed in battle because of their arrogance. But what about the rest of Israel? And where is Samuel in all of this? Well, we find out in 1 Samuel, starting in chapter 7, in the middle of verse 2. We read, "Then all the people of Israel turned back to the Lord. So Samuel said to all the Israelites, 'If you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts, then rid yourselves of the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths, and commit yourselves to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines.' So the Israelites put away their Baals and Ashtoreths and served the Lord only. Then Samuel said, 'Assemble all Israel at Mizpah, and I will intercede with the Lord for you.' When they had assembled at Mizpah, they drew water and poured it out before the Lord. On that day they fasted, and there they confessed, We have sinned against the Lord." Now Samuel was serving as leader of Israel at Mizpah. Finally, the people return to God. Finally, they pursue his way of holiness. But when the Philistines learn about this, they hear that all Israel is gathering at Mizpah. They see an opportunity. Maybe they can finally wipe out Israel in one fell swoop. And they attack. When Israel learns about their advance, we read in verse 7 that Israel is afraid. But something has changed. They've repented of their sins. They have a new appreciation and respect for the holiness of God. They have turned their hearts to God. And having repented, notice how differently they respond compared to their approach back in chapter 4. Remember in chapter 4? They first told God what he did, and then they told God what he was going to do. And they were arrogant about it. They believed that if they could just whip out the Ark of the Covenant, God was obligated to defeat the Philistines. And they were slaughtered. Israel was slaughtered in their arrogance. But now things have changed. In chapter 7, verse 8, they have a very different response. Look at what they said. They said to Samuel, "Do not stop crying out to the Lord our God for us, that he may rescue us from the hand of the Philistines." Then Samuel took a suckling lamb and sacrificed it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. He cried out to the Lord on Israel's behalf, and the Lord answered him. You see the difference? They now show respect to the holiness of God. They submit themselves before him. They cry out to him. They don't see God as obligated to help them, but they see God as he is. They're focused on his holiness. So, because the people are humble, submitting themselves to God as they should be, Samuel cries out to God, and God answers. And in the rest of the chapter, we learn that God gives Israel a great victory. First, God thunders some sort of miraculous sound, and it throws the Philistine military into a panic. Basically, that just leaves the army of Israel a mop-up job. And Samuel sets a stone of remembrance, calling it Ebenezer, a stone of help, because God helped them. And as the chapter concludes, we learn that throughout Samuel's lifetime, the Lord was against the Philistines. That Israel gained territory. They even had peace with other regional peoples. And Samuel continued his ministry as the leader of the people. He was like a circuit riding preacher, going around from place to place to place, serving as judge and prophet of the Lord. What we see in this story is the principle of learning to submit ourselves before the Lord because he is holy. Instead of taking matters into our own hands, instead of thinking that we can just use him for our purposes, we turn away from arrogance and we inquire of him. We seek his ways. We seek to live according to his heart. So what does it mean to submit ourselves to God? It means we have a humble heart, seeing ourselves in relationship with the holy God who loves us. And that humble heart brings us to a posture where we trust in God, even in the middle of our pain, even in the middle of those difficult circumstances when we don't know what the answer is. We trust him because he is holy and he loves us and he is for us, even when life doesn't seem to be going the way we hope it's going. Submitting ourselves to God is choosing to look to him and his ways for our next steps. Submitting to God is asking him to evaluate our thoughts, our actions, our attitudes. We go to him in listening prayer, in reading and studying the Bible, in having conversations with others, and we go to him with that open mind, that open heart that says, Lord, I need you. You are the holy God, not me. Submitting ourselves to God means that we avoid an attitude of just simply checking off the religious boxes. You know, like Israel thought they could just use the ark as a weapon. They could use it as they saw fit. We can do this too. We can do our daily devotions, go to church, put money back in the offering basket, sing the songs, and believe that God is duty-bound to bless us. We need to have a very different attitude of just checking off the boxes as if we can manipulate God. Instead, submitting ourselves to God means we are in relationship with Him. We're in relationship with the holy God who wants us to have that attitude of humility and teachability before Him because He's for us, because He loves us. Healthy relationships don't involve forcing the other person or manipulating them. And so we don't want to do that with God either. Instead, we say, as Jesus taught, Lord, apart from you, I can do nothing. Remain in me, and I will remain in you and be led by you. I encourage you to think about what it means to submit to the leading and to the love of a holy God.